Frozen Music is a video series from ABB presenting unique building projects and the architects behind them to a global community. Follow us around the world.
Welcome back, and now we're going to do the second of the winners in the civic category, and this is an Aquatic Community Centre, and the architects are HCMA. So please start your presentation.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today, at least virtually. This is the təməsew Aquatic and Community Centre. Təməsew is the indigenous Hunkaminam word for sea otter house. The project is located in the city of New Westminster, which is close to the larger city of Vancouver here on the west coast of Canada. And I suppose notably, the city of New Westminster was actually the original capital city for the province of British Columbia. And so it was really the center of colonial power on the west coast here. And I think we're just starting to understand what that's meant, what the impact of colonialism has meant here on the West Coast. We know certainly that it's meant the erasure of much of Indigenous identity and culture, and to a large extent also it's reshaped the landscape itself. And so that's relevant here because it's the starting point or the jumping off point for this design story. The site here, you can see, is located on what was formerly a very significant land feature in the city of New Westminster called the Glenbrook Ravine, and that's just up from the Fraser River. And I say notable, formerly notable, because as you can see here from these images, over the last sort of 40, 50 years, that ravine was actually largely backfilled with garbage and leveled off and almost completely deleted from the landscape. And so our site is on the former sort of headwaters of that ravine. You can see here the original topography that ran through the site that was largely leveled off and filled in. And then the urban or the sort of colonial structure of street networks and the urban grid that then surrounded it. And that urban grid notably is not oriented cardinal north-south, but it's on a slight skew to that. And so we took the position from a design standpoint that the building should take an attitude to this. And we took it off of the urban grid and oriented it primarily to that original topography as a way of reconstituting a deeper relationship with context and with the land. So the building program itself is varied. It has it has both dry and wet programming. There's childcare, gymnasiums, multi-purpose spaces, and then a complement of both competitive and leisure-focused swimming. We started by iterating, trying to find, I suppose, a form that was comfortable for the site and sort of unlocked the potential of both the site and its context. And it wasn't an easy site. There's two existing buildings here highlighted in pink that needed to remain operational during the course of construction. And then the red dashed line here is a major sanitary line that runs through the site, and we couldn't build over top of that. And so the sort of major design challenge here was creating an architecture that was intentional and had meaning, and that was not just the resultant of a series of difficult site constraints. So we started by using that sanitary line as an excuse to reconstitute the ravine. And so not topographically, but as a major urban public realm piece that connected the vestiges of that ravine on both sides of the site and really allowed for a new site orientation and a site circulation and brought back the memory of that ravine space. The building program itself is really large and long, and we realized quickly we were dealing with a building that was of the scale of the city block. It wasn't an individual building so much as it was an urban block scaled building. And so we started to try and break that down and make sense of it, both to start to kind of create a toothier edge that would engage more intimately with the ravine space, but also as a way of humanizing that scale and just bringing it down. The major move here, of course, then was to take the grid itself and shift it off of the urban grid and align it with a cardinal north-south direction. And that's both to orient it more deliberately to the ravine, but also to take advantage of this amazing north light that we can then bring in. And for aquatic programming, north light is extremely important because you can bring it in without fear of glare or affecting lifeguarding. And so that was a major shift. The building itself being a block long, we decided to take the approach that it was more of an urban planning exercise than a design exercise. And so we broke it down to individual buildings within a building and gave each building a roof form that responded directly to the program within it. And then to give it some coherence, we created a fascia line, a singular line that wraps its way all the way around the building. And you can actually take your finger and trace that line all the way around the building. And the only place you take your finger off the page is at the lobby space, which is really the sort of social heart of the building and signifies entry and welcome and a special moment in the program. The site itself, it meant the way the building was sited meant that there was actually no backside to the building, but it also gave us the opportunity to bring two front doors into the building. And so that created a character to the entry sequence that was different on both the north and the south sides of the site. You can see here the ground floor plan and the two sort of major plazas on the north and south entry of that central atrium space. And that takes you into sort of a crucible circulation system that is highly intuitive and rational, but is intended to allow you to have views to that ravine space at all times. And so we oriented all of the major grid lines and structural elements in the north-south direction to unlock that kind of natural view corridors and wayfinding device. And that's consistent with the second floor as well. The character of the two different plazas is they're both different and unique. The North Plaza is more informal. It's I would say perhaps a bit more casual, and it's focused a bit more on recreational activities. And so there's an emphasis here on spilling the life of the building inside to the outside. And then when you transition over to the South Plaza, the feeling is very different. This is about sort of a slightly more, I guess, organic civic approach to the building, where you're passing through that ravine space. And no matter where you come from on this part of the site, you have to travel through that landscape space and sort of travel through it before you get to the front door of the building. And then, of course, the sort of the calling card, the thing that the space that brings you to the site and brings you into the building, that front door, is the lobby space, the community living room, and we've highlighted that in a mass timber roof and a custom lighting strategy that will really highlight that and tell you where you're going on the site. That lobby space is intended to be highly flexible and adopt a wide series of programming options. It's intended to connect directly to the building programming on both sides of it and really allow that seamless transition inside to outside. This is a cross section here, and you can see through the length of the building, you can see here how long that building is and that spatial variation that we tried to achieve with the different building roof heights and forms throughout. The long section was really important to us through the lap pool. These are sawtooth roof structures that are sort of these customized trusses that allow us to bring in the north light and do so in a way and hide and bury all of the electrical and mechanical systems in the depths of that truss, so we can light the entire lap pool without direct lighting. And so it's a very even sort of wash of light, which is great for swimming. It's great space just to be in as well. The fitness space, you know, you go to most fitness spaces, they're sort of large rectangular open boxes, and we took a different attitude. We decided to sort of push the fitness space into all the nooks and crannies of the planning, of the resultant planning. And what that gives you is a very different spatial perspective or experience, no matter where you are in the building. So one day you're on a treadmill looking at this view, and the next day you're looking at a very much a different view through the building. The leisure pool itself was all about connecting people to the landscape, and really there's a series of large opening bifolding doors that bring fresh air and daylight into the building on the left and allow you to just feel like you're underneath the roof without necessarily being indoors. The materiality, we were trying to balance a sort of civic timelessness with a warmth. And so that black and white palette is intended to sort of achieve a more timeless quality, an enduring quality to it, representing an appropriate sort of civicness to the site. And in the wood and water is, of course, a building element here in an aquatic center that sort of adds that warmth and that touch. We also broke some new ground in North America as far as how you clean water with minimal use of chlorine, and developed a whole campaign around this, around keeping the pool fresh and educating people on the connection between energy and water cleanliness. And on the topic of energy, you can't ignore the sort of carbon and climate discussion these days. We're really proud of the fact that this will be the first zero carbon pool in all of Canada, and so it's completely electric, and it really changes the typology for this building type with respect to the climate conversation. And with that, I'll leave you on the slide, and thank you again for the opportunity to present today.
Well, thank you very much. Mariana, would you like to start on this one?
Sure. I think you mentioned that each of the roof formats respond to different functions. Can you tell me how the function reflects in each of the formats?
Sure. The lap pool itself has these sawtooth roof structures that are really intended to bring in the north light, and so that's an entire lighting strategy there. The roof over the leisure pool was really intended to start to direct people. It's a timber roof, and so it was intended to try and replicate just an extension of the indoor to the outdoor relationship. The roof over the lobby.
If you want to share the image and try to explain the inclinations.
Sure.
I think I got the northern one on the lap pool that brings the lights, but the rest of it, I don't see the connection yet.
Yeah. So what you can see here, largely they're responding to spatial conditions within. So there's certain height requirements within the gymnasium that are driving, obviously, the form of the gym. And then what we're with the and that's the volume that you're seeing here, just seconds from the left. That volume then slopes down over the multipurpose room to try and defer to a smaller scale along that front elevation. And then you can see the roof form over the lobby space here, this one right here. It sort of butterflies up on both sides to signify entry and to create a different spatial experience as you're coming in from the outside to the inside. And then that leisure pool in the middle, that plate again folds down to both meet the fascia line, but also just to provide sort of that extension of that wooden plate from the outside to the inside.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ankur, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, you spoke about the two plazas at the edges of the building. I was just wondering, given the scale and the length of the building, are there other instances? How does the building kind of interact at the ground plane level? In one of your views, the portals kind of open up to the greens. That's evident, but in the other instances or other spaces, how do they interact at the ground plane with the expanse around the building?
Sure. Yeah, I can take you to a couple of views here. Well, this view here, you can see there's actually a datum line that's established on this volume here, which creates and you can see it here. So that black volume, it projects, it cantilevers out over the ground floor and creates sort of spatial alcoves within that sort of tooth or that sawtooth ground plane. And so there's large openings in most of those rooms. Some of those are multi-purpose rooms that want a relationship with the outside. Some of them are just closed off or don't have that direct connection. But it's intended to create these sort of micro spaces underneath that larger black volume that are more appropriately scaled. And then the one other corner here that I'll try and find for you. In plan here, you can see this was a moment here where we're trying to create views into that lap pool from the street and give people that are traveling down the sidewalk, down the street, just sort of a moment to look into the building. And that actually continues on the north side here by the fitness center. So we're trying to, at key moments on those corners, bring programming out to the edge of the building that will activate that part of the building and give you eyes on the surrounding public realm. On On the north side here, and maybe I'll just skip ahead here quickly, you can see here the whole notion around that smaller gymnasium is really intended to kind of open up, and there's large folding doors there as well that are interacting with that outdoor sort of plaza space. So that's some of the ways in which we're trying to engage at that ground plane level.
Peter.
Key thought is whether changing the grain from the imposed city grain to this topographical grain was actually worth the bother. Just a notice that runs down, and when I look at the way you have composed the building, I think what this is involved in is particularizing. Building is particularizing things, but then it's trying to pull it back. When one looks at the perspective views, you see that the architecture is all the time trying to pull it back together. So it's kind of, it wants to be particular, but then it wants to be a total object. And that's very difficult, I think, to control. So you have these sort of linking eaves, sort of bumps over the top, and then you pull it together, and then you repeat things. And I noticed that the fins that you get in plan are sort of also caught between the two geometries somehow. They're ordered to one geometry, but the edge the edge that they make is actually another geometry, and they're sort of running between the two. It's a question of, you know, grain, and it's also a question of, I think large buildings have once you do break them up, the question is how much do they cling on to that is common. I think it's a tricky one, and I'm not really so sure you've completely resolved it. And that might be to do with the fact that you turned the thing, and then there are instincts, certain instincts of wanting to pull it back to the other geometry, and you particularize the roofs, but in some ways they're not. They want them to be controlled at the same time.
Sorry, no? I didn't catch the end of that question. I didn't catch the end of that question. Could you just repeat that, please?
It's to do with the last bit was to do with the roof profiles, that they are sort of semi-particular, but they're also being in a way bedded onto a certain commonality of line at the same time. So I think the building is sort of fighting itself to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, I would agree that there's a difference in the grain of the site of the ground plane, and there's difference with how that hits at the roof plane. I guess I would say we did actually look at, there's some of the models you saw earlier. They took an attitude that was perhaps a little more rigorous in terms of driving the ground floor grain, as you're calling it, right up through the structure in the building. And what we found is that it imposed a geometry and an experience on the site that just wasn't aligned with what we were trying to achieve. And so, you know, we as we were developing the forms, you know, allowing the roof form to have a certain flexibility to it, that sort of rested on a ground plane that was slightly different, started to make sense. And from our sense, or from our perspective at least, the sort of spatial characteristics that come out of that, we feel we're successful, but it certainly is two different sort of characters or grains.
I think the old, you know, one could say that the old civic buildings of you know, 100 years ago or whatever had a certain bloody-mindedness about them. They said this is the architectural idea, and that's what it's going to do. I think your generation and my generation have been subjected to being more humane about these things, more, you know, more responsive, and that sometimes fights the total presence of the object. It's a paradox.
And I think here, the objects are so specific that you've got the shape of the lap pool, you've got the shape of the sports hall, you know, they are very, very rigid rectilinear forms. And I think it's quite difficult, really building on what Peter has said, to try to make those forms, or a building that accommodates those forms, work with these sort of quite subtle and quite complex geometries, such as a ravine that you were outlining right at the beginning?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, these are not easy shapes, I guess, to fit into the mold. And so, you know, I guess what we're trying to do through all of that is place the human experience at the center of it, and rather than sort of be slavish to an extreme geometric exercise, try and find a character to the spaces that was meaningful for an individual's human experience, and bringing those people together.
Okay, well, we're finished on time, but thank you very much for that. And now we're going to have another short break, and we're going to come back to see the presentation for the winner of the office category in a few moments. So I will see you then. Thank you very much.